Good morning, everybody. This is StoryHive on location in Vancouver with Beats, Eats,
and more.
We are broadcasting live right now on the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. Utmost love and respect to the original stewards and protectors of these lands and these waters. Also, a big shout out to TELUS STORYHIVE for powering today's episode. My name is Kazi, and I'm joined today by the one, the only, Ciele Beau. Hey, a Vancouver-based multidisciplinary visual artist and musician whose work spans painting, illustrations, murals, and design. You've likely seen her bold and playful murals throughout Greater Vancouver area, in parks, on picnic tables, on large-scale walls, and more. Alongside her public and commercial work, Ciele's art practice is shaped by Synesthesia, a sensory crossover where sound becomes color. Through her sound-to-color method, Ciele translates songs into bold visual compositions that unfold in musical time, inviting us to experience sound and art in an entirely new way. Yeah. Welcome, Ciele!
Yay!
Thanks for being here. How are you feeling?
Good. Thank you for having me. This is so fun.
I'm really grateful that you could join us this morning to chat more about your creative process, about your artistic journey. And so I really want to start from the very beginning. What kind of kid were you, and how did your environment shape the kind of artist you are today?
Wow, that is a good question. Okay, this is a different kind of interview. Yeah.
You're like, what were you preparing for?
I don't know. Sometimes they're really basic, but that was a really nice question.
Kazi is not basic.
Yeah. What kind of kid was I, and what
environment shaped who you are today? Yeah.
Okay. I was really shy, so super quiet kid. Very not just to myself. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings.
Okay.
So that definitely shaped me. My siblings are like 5, 8, and 10 years older than me. So there was like an interesting mix of having older siblings around, and then they also like moved away, and then I was almost like an only child as well. So there was an interesting mix that way. But I've always been very creative, and when I was younger, people would always say like I was inaudible because I was just so quiet, and I think I just like very in my head and really just sensitive to my environment as well. And so I think that part of that sensitivity plays into how I approach my art practice and creativity as well. But a few other things, I guess, environment-wise, that's such an interesting thing to think about. I grew up in the Northwest Territories until I was about 7.
Okay.
And my family had been there for like 12 years. We were in a really isolated community called Delaney in Northwest Territories. And actually in like the first year of my life, we lived up in like above the Arctic Circle in Nunavut. So I actually like grew up in mostly like indigenous environments as a young child. And there's something really beautiful about those communities and that culture. And then also because it was such an isolated community, like you had to fly to get into the town. You couldn't drive in unless you took, in the winter, there was like, it's called the ice highway, where like the river, Mackenzie River, I think it is, it basically freezes over, and that's where like semi-trucks and stuff can bring in like supplies.
On the ice,
yeah. And then people also can drive this like river highway basically. So that's the only time you could drive in and out of the community was like during this period of time. But otherwise you had to fly. So anyway, the point is that we were really isolated. The town is 600 people. And so my mom, she was homeschooling us, and then also a few other neighborhood kids. And we would finish our like schoolwork really early. And so then she had to find ways to like keep us entertained. And so it's like she would teach us how to sew and make our own dolls, and just so many random like crafts and creative outlets in order to like keep us, because we also didn't have like a ton of television at the time too. There was no cable there. It was like we had a few like VHSs that we watched over and over and over again, but otherwise it was very like hands-on practical creativity, which I think is also just like a product of the time that we grew up in as well. Was
totally.
A lot less online.
A 90s kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, I think that like really played into me honing in a lot of those kind of the creative side of things, because that was really all there was to do. We're also like a really musical family, and so I'm also a musician, and so it was a combination of all the things. And then eventually moved to Ontario for a few years, and then that was kind of weird because I felt like an alien, because I like didn't, it was like peak Spice Girls, Backstreet Boys era, like 97, 98, and I moved down to like more modern culture, I guess, in a way, like where there's just like more access to mainstream media is
the
essentially
urban culture.
Exactly. And so then like showing up and being like, I don't know who the Spice Girls are, I don't know who the Backstreet Boys are, like just things like that, and having to like catch up with everybody. And in a way I've moved so much in my life, like probably at least 25 plus times.
Wow.
And so I think there's always been like a little part of me that always feels a little bit on the outside of everything. And so something about having like a creative practice helps like ground me to where I am or what I'm doing.
So then what was your earliest memory then of seeing art being done that you were like, I want to try that, I want to do that, that's something I want to pursue? Bob Ross? Bob Ross?
I was say like maybe Art Attack. I was going to say Art Attack.
Oh
I loved that show.
I want that back.
Right? Yeah. It was so wholesome. Yeah. I mean, those could be it. Mr. Dress Up, honestly, was like a huge one as a kid. I mean, there's Sesame Street too, but from an arts perspective and like crafts and even just self-expression, I feel like, because Mr. Dress Up had like the tickle trunk and like, you know, all like the dress up clothes and things like that as well. So obviously super, super young, those would have been early on things.
Did you have a specific moment where, you know, in your early explorations of painting or drawing, that you received like an affirmation that like, oh, this is something you're talented in?
Actually, yes. In grade 3, I had like just moved down to Ontario, so it was like a new school. I was like kind of figuring things out. And so one of the things that in my sort of introvertedness, I was like drawing a lot. And we had an art teacher, or maybe she wasn't even the art teacher. She was just like temporarily there. Anyway, she was one of my fellow students' moms, and she was like, you're really good at this. And she bought me like my first sketchbook. Like outside of everybody else was just, you know, drawing on their paper or whatever. But she's like, I think you need a sketchbook. And I actually still have that sketchbook. It was just a little one, but I remember her like belief in me and like being like, this is where your art is going to live kind of thing. Like she gave me like a little vessel that was like, it's important and it deserves to be in here. That really meant a lot to me. And I still think about that sometimes. So I'm like, I wonder what would have happened if she hadn't given me that sketchbook and like specifically told me that she thought that there was something there.
Oh, what were your other sources of inspiration or mentors that came along your path?
Most of my life, I kind of was very halfway split between music and art up until even just probably up until the pandemic. Then I kind of had to shift a little bit, but both things went like really hand in hand for me. And so one particular mentor that really stands out, I had a piano teacher in like junior high school who he was just so awesome. His name's Joseph Lai, and he's in Edmonton, and he's a really amazing classical piano player. I'm just throwing that out there.
Wow.
And I learned piano, and he's a really great teacher, but more than that, he became like a mentor, just a general mentor. Like we would spend half our time talking. It's very possible he also had ADHD, and neither of us knew that we had ADHD, but we just like were like vibing, you know? Yeah. And so we were just like always talking, and he was so supportive of everything that I did. And he even like taught me how to be a page turner for him when he was doing his like classical concerts. I was like the person that sat next to him and was reading his music and like changing the pages and things like that, because he had a lot of students, but he really trusted me to be able to like be on top of that task. And there was just certain things about how he showed up in my life kind of outside of just being a teacher that was really impactful and important.
Was there a moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to really choose this path now? Or did it just happen?
I think in some ways it sort of just happened, and then there was some intentional decision making. Like ever since I was young, the things that really resonated with me and that got me excited, that I was like passionate about, tended to be in art and music in that realm. And then as I went along, you know, with like high school, there was the opportunity to do the art program at a bit of a higher level. So I kind of like did that. And then I also at that time was in a hip hop band.
What?
And so I
love that.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
I was in this like kind of conscious rap group, I guess. And so it was these three guys, and they were people I had grown up with, and they were like very much like my brothers kind of thing. And so they were like MCs, they did all their rapping and they wrote all their stuff. And then I would sing the choruses. I was like, we always joke that I was the Fergie of the group, you know?
Oh my gosh.
A little less like cool, but yeah, anyway.
Or possibly cooler.
I don't know.
You have an amazing voice.
Thank you. I was
really.
really shy at the time. Sometimes I wish I could go back and like feel a little bit more confident in those moments, because I'm like, that was such a cool opportunity. But it was still like really fun to do, and it taught me a lot about, you know, collaboration, working with a group, even just like as someone who tends to be, I performed a lot when I was younger, considering it's not a comfortable place for me to be, and yet there's something in my like makeup that wants to be seen in a really big way. And so that's like definitely a very big like personal struggle, where I'm like, I don't want to be perceived ever. And then on the other hand, I'm like, please look at me. Not me, but look at what I'm like, what I have to say, or like the work that's more important. It's not actually about me. And I think that's where like that, it's a very thin line though. And so I could get into that more around like why I chose art over music a little bit as well, because there's some stuff there. But yeah, so I was doing the hip hop thing and writing a lot and singing, and that was all in high school. And then for university, I think there was nothing else I really wanted to do in university other than go to art school. For me, in terms of like going and making it worth the time, I was like, I don't know, this just feels like the thing. So I did it. I went to UVic for their art program. It was a great program. I think art and academia sometimes doesn't always mix super well. And I actually didn't paint for like 2 years after I graduated, because I was like broken in a way from that experience. But then I came back from it and was able to like see what some of the learnings were in a more like practical way, and a less, and I actually developed this like painting style while I was in university. So I'm really grateful for that time.
Wow. I love all of that. Yeah. I want to jump back now to the part that you were talking about, how you don't want to be perceived, but that you want to be seen. And I resonate with this because there's a reason why I go by Kazemi Houdini, the Houdini vibe, you know?
She's here and then she is.
And that there are very specific contexts in which, like, I definitely don't want to be watched, which is funny because I get a compliment a lot that people think I'm a really great dancer, but I don't like being watched or performing. It makes me really nervous and I feel very vulnerable. But then at the same time, if I'm like public speaking, I feel comfortable to do that because I feel like what I'm speaking on is beyond me. It's not, it's actually not about me.
Right.
You know, so I love how you phrase that and worded that. And I would love for you to explain a bit more about how you came to learn that about yourself.
Yeah, it's such a weird dilemma, like personal dilemma. I think, you know, like I mentioned, like pretty quiet kid, generally a fairly quiet person. I mean, now I'm a lot more outgoing, and if you get me in the right context, I can like totally be loud and whatever. But generally, the feedback that I would get from other people is like, oh, you're so quiet, you're so blah, blah, blah. And so when you hear that back, even if it's true, sometimes when you hear that feedback, you start to be like, okay, well, I'm a quiet, small person, you know? And so there's something about like that inner identity that kind of has always been a bit of it's a part of me. And then also there's a part of me that's like, but I really want to express, and I want to have things to say, and I want to be heard, because a lot of times people can't hear me because I'm so soft-spoken. And so there's a very literal part of me wanting to like be heard. But then also like a metaphorical wanting to be heard as well. But I don't necessarily actually like being the center of attention. And so there's a weird thing with doing art and music where, you know, in those early days as part of a group, it was fine because it's like you kind of just have your moment.
Yeah.
And it's for the progress of the song. That's your part. Everybody's playing their part. It was like a collective thing. But then once I moved into doing solo music, which I love, and I need to get back into music because there is a part of me the last couple of years that hasn't done it so much, and I'm like feeling that yearning of like needing to express that way. But I just, there's something about with music, you become the product, not necessarily the music. Like to promote your music, you kind of have to promote yourself because we live in such a visual world, like with Instagram and everything for promotion is also visual versus like the music doesn't just speak for itself. You have to have a picture of something in order to promote the thing. And usually that ends up being yourself, right? And so sometimes that's fun. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do it, Whereas with art, it's already visual and it can sort of speak for itself. The concepts can speak for itself. And I can be a little bit like divorced from the art as a person, I mean, I want people to know that I made the art or be like, hey, you're that person that did that thing. I mean, that always feels nice when people recognize that. Yeah. But as like being the central drive or like focus of what I'm doing is not it, and so and sometimes makes me like very uncomfortable. I don't know what that is. I'm gonna talk to my therapist about it or something, Yeah. But yeah, it's a very interesting contrast, inner contrast.
I would love to actually tap more into your visual art. And for me, when I've experienced your work, whether I've seen the murals or your paintings on picnic tables, like the work is joyful, of what I've seen so far. And I love the color palettes. And I'm curious to know a bit more about how you've developed your sense of style and aesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like when I remember in university and stuff too, just I was like, what's my style? Because I can do we can all do a lot of different things, but it's like, okay, what is the thing that you're going to focus on or hone in on? And I remember watching a lot of YouTube videos that are like, this is how you find your style and like blah, blah, blah. And like for art specifically. Yeah. And I'm just kind of being like, it just didn't, it was, and nothing ever came of it. And the thing that actually makes a practical difference is just the more that you do it, because you have to practice and you have to experiment. And then it's like with anything, it's like the more that you do, then it starts to kind of boil down into something, and so I think that's kind of how it developed over time in terms of like a bit of like the last 5 years, especially, I think a bit of a style has really emerged from what I've done, but it's just because I tried a lot of things. And then there's also things that are just like innate to me, I guess, as well. I think one thing that I have never worked towards, but is just sort of innate, is my like sense of color. That's just something that like, I don't know how to tell people how to do that part. And I've noticed that like different artists have different palettes over time, like where not even that they're sticking with the same palette, but somehow their approach to color becomes like an identifying thing. And I've heard people say that about my work, because sometimes I'm also like, I don't know what my style is, but then people are like, but it's your use of color that I notice first. And I'm like, that's very interesting, because that's not something that I have like actively set out for. That's just something that's sort of there. So I don't know. I think, finding your style is sort of, some of it's work, and then some of it is just kind of like digging for the like what's innate in you to come out.
And being willing to experiment and explore and then see how it feels when it emerges.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, like, you're right. Like a lot of the work that I do is like very colorful, very joyful. Like that's something that is important to me in terms of like leaving people with a certain way of how they're feeling or whatever. But within this last year, like I started doing some slightly moodier pieces and stuff as well. Like there's some on the wall behind you that are like just a little darker color palette, and even the themes are maybe just a little more introspective, a little more moody, whatever. And some people being like, oh, you did that? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, oh yeah, we can all do a lot of things, and I can still do a lot of things, and it's okay for me to experiment with new things as well, especially when you've been doing something for so long. And what I've noticed that I'm like, I love what I do, but my commercial work is the very like bright poppy stuff. But then I'm like, well, what is it that I also really want to be saying in my own expression as well outside of that? And so then there's this little like offshoot that's starting to happen for me as well. So that's exciting. Just like that shift, that change as we grow. And
do you ever feel blocked from creating? And if so, in those moments, what do you do to turn, or what do you do in order to become unstuck?
I think creative block has looked different for me throughout my life. I think in periods where I wasn't in as much of an active practice or like flow with art being my actual work, like income work and business, if I left painting for too long, I would almost feel like I couldn't do it anymore every time I went back to it, because it was like, oh, I haven't painted for 3 months, must not know how to do it anymore, or like it's just dramatic, it's gone, just so chill. And I think also some of that too, and I think a lot of creatives struggle with this, is the sense of like perfectionism and wanting that everything that you make is like the perfect masterpiece. It's your best work every time. You're not going to make any mistakes, like that type of thing. And at least that's definitely part of some of my inner dialogue that I've had to work through over the years. But, over time you learn that not everything is going to be a masterpiece. Everything is practice until it's finished. And so that's just part of the process, is making the work. And so sometimes you just have to be willing to show up and make something that might not actually be good. But it's okay, because it's going to inform the next thing that's probably going to be awesome. And so that process and getting over that mental hurdle, I think, is actually the biggest thing with creative block. It's like such a mental game. One thing though, that as I've like been doing this for as long as I have and just continue to keep doing it, and especially when have to be creative for client work, because you have to be creative sort of just on a whim and so quickly. And again, like not everything is going to be perfectly what you might want it to be as an artist, but it's going to be perfect for the client. And so those are also two different approaches, like your personal practice and then like a business practice. They're kind of two different things. And I found that having to create client work has just really strengthened that muscle to be able to come up with ideas faster, to just pick up where I left off a lot faster. But it's definitely, I would say it's like a muscle. It really is a muscle. Creativity is a muscle in some ways. And so exercising that, the more you exercise it, the easier it is to lift it,
So I watched that interview you did with CBC, which was really cool. And you share in this story, or in this interview, about how at 22 years old in art school, right, you learned about having synesthesia.
Yes.
Can you share a bit more about that, and what is that for those who don't know?
Yeah, so synesthesia is, it's a neurological condition. So the brain misfires sensory information. And synesthesia itself is a broad term. So there's a lot of types of synesthesia. I have 3 different types of synesthesia that I know of.
Okay.
And one of them is sound to color synesthesia. And so when I hear music and tone, I see color and shape. And so this is something that I've always had, but I didn't know, because I didn't realize that my experience was not everybody else's experience. It's like, I don't know, we don't talk about the blood flowing in our veins because it's just happening. So I'm like, sure, this is just what music is like. Yeah. It's so great, So then when I was in university, I had a painting class. I think it was in second year. And the prof was like, everybody has to paint a song, basically, or make a painting based on a song. But he was like, but don't be literal, so if the song's about birds, don't make a painting about birds. Sure enough, most of the people were like reasonably literal, which like I can't fault them, if it's just not in your, it was an abstract assignment, and that was the point, So nobody got it wrong, but there was some very literal paintings. But mine, I chose this song by, it's called Pro Nails, I think.
Okay.
By Kid something or other. Yeah. Anyway, it was like this really chaotic electronic song.
Yeah.
But I had been like really listening to it a lot lately. So I was like, I'm going to paint this one. And so I just made this painting, and it's just all colors and shapes and whatever. And it came super naturally, and it just made a lot of sense. But when you look at it, it's very abstract. Like, you're just like, huh? Yeah. And so I showed it at this crit that I was telling you about, where you put your work up in front of everybody and then they have to say something. And I put my work up, and it was just like silence, which is honestly worse than feedback. No feedback is worse than feedback. And nobody knew what to say, because you play the song, and then you show your piece kind of thing. And everyone was just kind of like, and my prof was kind of like, okay. He's like, well, it's not literal, so that's good. And people were like, I like the colors, but they just didn't really know, you know? And I was just like, they don't get it. But I didn't get it either, because I didn't know that I had synesthesia. Yeah. So I didn't know that it was like a weird thing. Yeah. So then I forget about it. Yeah. Move on with my life, you know? Another crit in the bag, whatever. Yeah. And then the next year, like over the summer, we come back September for like third year, and one of my peers, she was like, okay, I couldn't stop thinking about your painting. And I was like, that's nice, in a good way? Like, I don't, and she's like, yeah, I learned about this thing called synesthesia over the summer, and I think that you might have it. And at the time, I was like, couldn't even say the word. I kept forgetting the word, so I'd have to keep asking her, like, wait, sorry, what was that thing that you said? And then I'd keep forgetting to look it up. And then finally, like 2 months later, I actually looked up what synesthesia was and like read a bit about it. And I was like, oh, there's a word for this experience. And it was like oddly validating. Not that it wasn't something that I felt like I needed validation on, because I didn't even know it was a thing that I had, different from other people. But once I realized that like this was a thing, all of a sudden that painting made sense to me, and a lot of like earlier experiences kind of made sense to me. And so I kind of like dove into understanding synesthesia, and I was like, do I have to get diagnosed? And you can't really get diagnosed. It's not a thing. So I was like, okay, I guess I just have to somehow make people believe that I have this thing. Like, I was like, this is so abstract. I was like, I don't know. It was very odd. So, so it was around that time that I started thinking about synesthesia a lot. And it just happened to be that I learned about it at the same time as my, like, art degree time period. And so it took a couple of different tries, but pretty soon, like early on, I developed this, I call it the color frequency method, and I really early on kind of developed that. And I'd just done like a test with it was a canvas really large, actually. They were meant to be really big, but they've gotten a little smaller over the years just because people don't have space for big canvases in Vancouver. So anyway, but yeah, it just started as a test, and then there was the first song that I did was a Joni Mitchell song. Oh. And her music, like, she really loves to throw in random accidentals and sharps and, you know, things in the actual music that make her compositions really interesting. And so I did, Chelsea Morning was the first song that I had done, and she had a D natural and some C sharps in there that aren't part of the original key signature. And so when I was painting it, it's like everything's in this, you know, certain color palette, but then all of a sudden there's these weird, like, random orange squares and this one purple square that aren't part of the other key signature colors, because they just kind of pop in there. And I was like, oh, there's something so interesting about looking at music like this, where you can see all at once kind of the intricacies of a piece of music, and where somebody has made very specific musical choices. And the musician in me also really loved that. So it was this really cool blend of like the music and the art coming together. And that was like 14 years ago, but I'm still doing it and I really love it.
In your work, you describe that you're fascinated by the human condition and our emotional responses. What aspect of the human condition and our emotional responses are you fascinated by to explore within your work?
I think all of them. It could be anything, but I think just the way that we connect as human beings, and like on a very, I don't know, there's just so much online and things where life feels very superficial sometimes. And so it's like, okay, like what actually like makes us tick in a deeper emotional way, how are we actually relating to each other, maybe in a subconscious way even, but like what are the things that like truly are affecting us? What is like a, you know, what are the human stories that are kind of universal, even when we don't all have the exact same history? We know somebody that has experienced the thing, or we ourselves have experienced the thing, and you can go, you know, any place in the world, and there's these like through lines of how we connect and what we experience and what affects us. And so I think, I mean, maybe that's sort of basic, but that is like something that I'm very interested in. I think I'm a fairly sensitive person. I'm a very sensitive person, and especially when it comes to like people and their feelings, and just like very high kind of, I don't know, sensitivity to that, and wanting to understand us collectively, and then what am I experiencing that maybe connects with other people's experiences as well, and then how to express that. And yeah.
So your murals are all over Greater Vancouver area, which is awesome. How does creating for public space change the way that you approach your art?
Yeah, I think you just have to be really aware of the community that the work is going to be serving. I think that's something that I try to consider anytime I approach something that's going to be in a public space, whether it's like permanent or temporary. It's like, what is the actual goal of the artwork in this space? And is it just something that I like, or is it something that is actually meaningful to the people that live there? Because I don't necessarily live in all the places that I make art. And I think that especially as mural artists or people making public work, that's something like very important that you need to be considering when approaching work like that. We don't always get it right, you know, but to the best of your ability to like try to be considering those things. Yeah.
What are you most proud of at this point so far in terms of like what art piece or artwork you've done that you feel most proud of?
I think on a personal level, definitely the like synesthesia practice is like one of my favorite things that I get to do. I did a solo show this past year called Endure Everything, and it was like done in 3 acts, and it was all paintings that were musically, the songs that the paintings are based off of kind of took you through the journey of like your life completely falling apart, and then that sort of like middle in between searching kind of phase, and then like finding the hope on the other side. And I just come out of like a very tough couple of years of like basically like my whole life falling apart and having to rebuild. And so there was something really cathartic and beautiful about putting that body of work together. And also just like the response from other people was really nice too.
I can't let you get away without a really fun rapid fire round.
Okay.
So you don't
love a rapid fire.
Don't overthink. First thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Okay, a song you'll never get tired of seeing.
Ooh. You know what? I'm going to say both sonically and visually, Always Be My Baby by Mariah Carey is just like such a good one.
Color combo that always works.
Pink, blue, yellow.
A sound you wish you could turn off visually.
Probably like traffic. Yeah.
A sound you wish everyone could see.
The tone of a cello.
Oh, what do you see?
It's just that there's like a resonance that is like in almost everything. It's usually like a very deep color, and there's just like a texture to it that is just like really beautiful. Yeah.
Last one. In 2026, I want to
paint more murals and get married, because I am getting married.
Yes, you are. Oh, Ciele, this has been so nice. I'm really happy that we got this opportunity to get to know you more, hear more about your stories, your creative processes, obviously to get to see your art, which we'll take some more clips of and add into the edit. But yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for coming to my studio. So fun to host you guys and just have this conversation. It's so nice.
Yeah. And to anyone out there who's watching, anyone who's watching the replay, we really appreciate you. Also, if you're watching this and you are a creative here in Van City with a story to share, there will be a QR code that you can scan. It leads you to a form, and you can apply to possibly be in the hot seat right here next to me and have the opportunity to share your story here on this platform. Once again, big shout outs to TELUS STORYHIVE for powering today's episode. And you got to look up Ciele Beau on Instagram, Ciele Beau on your website, cielebeau.com.
Yes, and then the synesthesia stuff is at soundtocolor.com. I need to update the websites, but they are there. And yeah.
All right, y'all. My name is Kazi, and once again, thank you so much for watching Story Hive on location in Vancouver with Beats, Eats, and more.